Spartacus. We have to start here. Not because Spartacus was necessarily the greatest gladiator who ever lived, honestly, that's debatable, but because his story is so extraordinary that skipping him would be criminal, literally. Spartacus was a Thracian from the region of modern-day Bulgaria who ended up as a slave and was sent to a gladiatorial training school called Ludus in Capua, southern Italy, around 73 BC. And here is where his story immediately becomes different from every other gladiator on this list, because Spartacus didn't just fight in the arena, he escaped from it. In 73 BC, Spartacus led a breakout from the Ludus with roughly 70 other gladiators using kitchen equipment as weapons: knives, spits, cleavers, whatever they could grab. They overpowered the guards, got out of the school, hijacked a cart of gladiatorial weapons they found on the road outside, and fled to Mount Vesuvius, which at this point had not yet erupted. That came 150 years later. From that camp on the mountain, Spartacus began something that no escaped slave in Roman history had ever managed at that scale: a full, armed rebellion. At its peak, the slave army led by Spartacus numbered somewhere between 70,000 and 120,000 people. They defeated multiple Roman armies. They marched the length of Italy. For roughly 2 years, they were genuinely undefeated against the most powerful military in the ancient world. The Roman Senate was afraid. They eventually sent one of their best generals, Marcus Crassus, who was also the richest man in Rome, to deal with the problem. And it took him a massive, brutal, grinding campaign to finally defeat the rebellion in 71 BC. Spartacus died in the final battle. His body was never found, which means to this day, nobody has confirmed exactly what happened to him in those last moments. 6,000 of his followers were crucified along the Appian Way, the main road from Capua to Rome, as a warning. A gladiator who started a rebellion with kitchen knives and almost brought the Roman Republic to its knees. That is not a movie. That actually happened. Flamma. This one is my personal favorite, and I think if more people knew about Flamma, he would be as famous as Spartacus, maybe more. Flamma was a Syrian gladiator who fought in Rome in the 2nd century AD. He was a secutor, one of the heavy-armed gladiatorial types who fought in full helmet and shield, and he was extraordinarily good at it. We know the details of his career from his gravestone, which was found in Sicily and is one of the most detailed gladiatorial records to survive from antiquity. According to his gravestone, Flamma fought 34 times. He won 21 of those fights outright. He drew 9, which in gladiatorial terms meant both fighters performed so well the crowd demanded they both live. He lost 4. In a career of 34 fights, he was only defeated 4 times. That is a record that any professional athlete in any sport in any era would be proud of. But here is the part that makes Flamma unique. In Roman gladiatorial culture, there was an award called the rudis, a wooden sword given to a gladiator to signify that he had earned his freedom, that he had fought enough, performed enough, bled enough, and was now free to walk away. Flamma was offered the rudis 4 times. 4 separate occasions when the crowd, the editor, the person running the games, and the system all agreed that this man had done more than enough and deserved his freedom. He said no. Every single time. He chose to go back. He chose the arena. His gravestone says he was a Syrian by birth and that he lived to 30 years old. For a gladiator, that is a reasonably long life, and he spent all of it fighting. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Spiculus. If Flamma is my personal favorite, then Spiculus is the most interesting story in terms of what gladiatorial fame could actually get you in ancient Rome. Spiculus was a murmillo, another heavily armed gladiatorial type, who fought during the reign of Emperor Nero in the 1st century AD. And he was so good and so popular that Nero became personally obsessed with him. Not in a weird way, well, maybe in a slightly weird way, but in the way that a powerful person becomes obsessed with a sports star. Nero attended his fights. Nero cheered for him publicly. And when Spiculus won a particularly impressive victory, Nero did something that had almost no precedent in Roman history. He gave him a palace and the estates that went with it. A gladiator, a fighter who was in many cases a slave or a prisoner, received a palace from the Emperor of Rome as a gift for winning a fight. Spiculus became genuinely wealthy, genuinely powerful, famous in a way that few people in Rome outside of the political class ever achieved. His name was known across the city. He was the kind of celebrity that people wrote about, talked about, argued about. And then Nero's reign ended badly, as it was always going to. In 68 AD, Nero was declared a public enemy by the Senate. His guard abandoned him, and facing inevitable capture and execution, he tried to find someone to help him die on his own terms, rather than be publicly humiliated. According to the historian Suetonius, the name Nero called out in his final moments was Spiculus. He wanted his favorite gladiator, the man he had given a palace, to be the one to end it. Spiculus couldn't be found in time. Nero died with the help of a secretary instead. It is a strangely sad ending to a story about one of the the most celebrated gladiators who ever lived, Commodus. Okay, this one is different from all the others, because Commodus was not a gladiator who became powerful. He was the most powerful man in the world who decided he wanted to be a gladiator. And the Romans found this absolutely mortifying. Commodus was the emperor of Rome from 177 to 192 AD, and he was, to put it diplomatically, not a great emperor, but he was fascinated by gladiatorial combat to the point of obsession. He trained constantly. He fought in the arena regularly, though his opponents were carefully managed to make sure he always won, which most Romans understood perfectly well. He gave himself a gladiatorial name, Hercules Reborn. He had statues of himself dressed as Hercules erected across Rome. He renamed Rome after himself. He renamed the months of the year after his own names and titles. There were 12 months, and he had 12 names, so this worked out conveniently for him. In the arena, Commodus fought with a deliberate and obvious advantage. He was the emperor. Nobody was going to genuinely try to kill him. His opponents in gladiatorial bouts were often wounded soldiers or disabled people who were placed in the arena and told to play along. He also fought animals, ostriches, hippopotamuses, elephants, and he was apparently genuinely skilled at this. He could decapitate an ostrich with a crescent-headed arrow while it was running, which is a sentence I did not expect to write today, but here we are. The Roman historian Cassius Dio was actually in the audience for some of Commodus's appearances in the arena. He describes the senators and nobles present being so uncomfortable because watching the emperor humiliate himself in public was considered a reflection on all of them, that they chewed on laurel leaves from their wreaths to hide the fact that they were trying not to laugh. Commodus was eventually assassinated in 192 AD. The conspirators included his wrestling partner and his own mistress. He was strangled in his bath, and the Roman Senate's immediate response to his death was to declare him an enemy of the state and tear his statues down, which is a very specific kind of legacy. Crixus. We started with Spartacus, so it feels right to come back to that story for one more person. Because Spartacus did not build his rebellion alone, and the person who helped him build it, and who history has almost completely forgotten, deserves his own moment. Crixus was a Gaul from the region of modern-day France, who was enslaved and trained as a gladiator at the same ludus in Capua as Spartacus. He was there at the breakout. He was one of the original 70, and in the early stages of the rebellion, he was one of Spartacus's most important commanders, leading his own force of thousands of men. The two eventually split. Historians debate whether this was a disagreement over strategy or a deliberate decision to divide the rebellion's forces to cover more ground. Spartacus wanted to lead the army north and eventually out of Italy. Crixus and a large portion of the rebel force stayed in the south and continued raiding. And in 72 BC, a Roman army under the consuls Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Clodianus caught Crixus's force at Mount Garganus and defeated them. Crixus was killed in that battle. Spartacus honored him. According to historical sources, after the battle, Spartacus forced Roman prisoners to fight each other as gladiators at a funeral ceremony for Crixus, essentially giving his fallen general the arena tribute that Roman society reserved for the wealthy and powerful. A former slave holding gladiatorial games to honor his dead friend with the empire's own soldiers as the performers. It is one of the most extraordinary reversals in ancient history, and almost nobody knows his name. If you want a part 2 on this, because we barely scratched the surface, there are so many more gladiators worth talking about. Drop a like or leave a comment below saying part 2. Check out the video on screen right now. And as always, wait, what?